Hello and welcome back to the channel. Thank you for joining me in another of my interviews even. Interval will come at the end. Welcome to the studio. As you can see, I have another guest in the studio. It's always fantastic when I have a guest. Today, my guest is Chris Coverdale. We've had Chris on the show. Hello, Chris.
Hi.
It's nice to have you back again. We're going to talk about decentralisation. That's what we're aiming to talk about. And Chris is somebody who's very keen, as I am, to get back to small government rather than big government.
Correct, yes.
And of course, not having so many taxes and all those sort of things, which actually, in our last conversation we had, you informed us how taxation and many of these penal things like the entrapments and all that are totally unlawful and illegal to pay them.
Absolutely. So at a recent conference where we were both together, I stood up and I said, well, I discovered in 2002 that it's a criminal offence to pay tax. And apparently the faces of the audience were lit up.
Well, I'm not at all surprised. I mean, it's one of those things that nobody actually wants to do, and we acquiesce because we feel that's our duty, but it turns out that that's not the case.
Absolutely right. It hasn't been the case for hundreds of years, particularly since the Second World War, when in customary international law, as a result of the judgment of the Nuremberg War Crimes Tribunal, any action by any person that helped crimes by their government would be aiding and abetting the government, and therefore the particular crime is the payment of money to the government to enable it to wage war and do all the other nasty things it does to us.
And we know currently, of course, the British government has been funding or at least contributing to a number of the big wars that have been going on, or the atrocities everywhere, but it's not just on that side of things, is it? That, I mean, we are under tyranny all the time in very small ways that we might groan and moan about, in the way that we're trapped on the speeding, on enforcement officers coming to your door for minor... I mean, the other day I had a woman who was approached by the council. She had her dog, and this is one of the viewers sent this in, and said she just stepped outside her door with the dog. A man from the council said, have you got a poo bag for that dog in your pocket? She said, I haven't, but I'll go back and get one. He said, it's too late, I'm fining you £100.
It is appalling.
I mean, you know, what kind of a world are we living in which this is going on? And these people seem to believe the nonsense that they've been told that they can get away with it.
Absolutely. And unfortunately, we have been programmed for centuries to obey orders, and obedience is probably the biggest problem we have in this country, worldwide. Obedience to government.
So tell us...
That's what we want to get away from.
Absolutely. So decentralising. I mean, at the moment, we're in a situation where a bunch of people who meet in Davos, for example, are very keen for this one world government, which is even bigger centralisation than you could have, let alone a British government wanting to be in control of everything. How do we move then? What's the process, do you think, that we need to start to do to get back to a smaller authorities and take back control ourselves?
Yeah, good question. I think that there is a number of things that we can do. And the first thing is to understand that we have sovereignty. We are sovereign men and women. We're born into this world, and nobody has authority over us unless we consent to them having it. So we need to withdraw that consent to other people's authority and understand our own sovereignty.
Right.
And as well, I am a sovereign man, and I take my decisions about what I want to do in life, and how I spend my money, and the orders I take from other people, and so on. And from now on, I'm in charge.
And And I suppose in principle that sounds very fine, and I'm sort of guessing what the audience might say, or some members of the audience. I mean, some will be going, "Oh yeah, we love that," but people will know that if they're challenging, say, the council tax,
Yes.
which is a tax that you're forced into paying, there's no negotiation in it,
Right.
and I've argued even that if you say, well, I can't pay it, but I'm happy to contribute to my society by painting the bridge or doing Meals on Wheels or weeding the park or contributing, because that's what the money is supposed to be going to the council for, we
Right.
are told. But if you try and challenge it, then and as a sovereign, you'll see on the council websites, oh, we don't have that freedom on the land business, the free man on you can't use those arguments against us because the legislation is clear. You've got to pay come what may. I mean,
And that's the problem, is we consent to that legislation. So you asked the question, what can we do? I mean, I think one of the most important things to do is to understand what the international legislation actually says.
right.
So I take it back to the UN Charter. Now, the whole world agreed in 1945, after both the First and Second World Wars, that this must never happen again, and we need a new society, basically. And we set up and signed and ratified the UN Charter. And that is very clear about the rules that governing the relationships between states. And that's the first thing that we need to uphold. For instance, it says quite clearly, we must never threaten or use force, and we must settle all disputes peacefully. And we agreed to do that, and that is a binding international rule that our government, because it likes to take charge, ignores all of those rules.
Yes.
And goes to war constantly. We've fought wars every year since 1945, and forces us to pay for those wars. And so that's one of the things we can do, is say, right, understand the law and stop paying for anything that is a criminal offence that causes harm to any other human being anywhere in the world.
And we do that in our taxes by acquiescing to pay. We're all told we have to pay them, but we're actually funding terrorism
And warfare and the medical interventions and everything else, all of which is actually doing harm to us. And we need to stop doing that and say, no, I want to uphold the international law which makes it a criminal offence for me to pay tax.
Yes.
And this is really what I described on a previous interview with somebody. This is a civil obedience campaign. All we need to do is to obey, or get our leaders and taxpayers to obey the laws that we've agreed with the rest of the world. And if we did that, none of this would be happening.
So that's interesting, because we hear about civil disobedience as being the key to doing it by, I'm not going to pay, but not giving perhaps the reason why they're not going to pay, because it's all set out in the law. The legislation is there. We're using their tools against them.
Exactly.
And so instead of that technically disobedient, you're being obedient by saying, actually, I can't pay this, because if I do, I'm aiding and abetting the very thing I don't want to happen, or that the law system has set in place to try and protect from happening.
Exactly. The laws say, you must be peaceful at all times, settle all disputes peacefully. And yet, here is our government in Britain having fought 83 wars or small conflicts since 1945, having broken every single one of the agreements we've made with the rest of the world. So all we need to do is to say, look, this is what the law says. I am going to, at all times, obey that law. And I want our leaders to obey it, and the taxpayers to obey it, and company directors, and the large companies, and the World Economic Forum, and all the rest of them.
Yes.
We've agreed these laws, let's keep them, and uphold them, and obey them, and enforce them.
we've heard about the sovereignty being stolen or about to be stolen by the WHO, who want to be able to be in charge and say, oh, there's a pandemic, even though there may not be, or any of that, and that we're going to have to obey to that. Does that trump those laws that you just referred to?
Absolutely not. No, it's just there's a big difference between the UN Charter and the UN. And it's important to realise that the UN Charter is the law, the statements of law that apply to every human being on the planet. And what we need to do is that was all agreed by everybody in 1945, and then the United Nations was set up to implement and assist with the peacekeeping and the implementation of that law. But of course it's never done that. It's been perverted right from the start in certain ways, and now, unbelievable, it hardly does anything according to the law agreed in the United Nations.
But do you think as we change every government, the Prime Minister and the Cabinet Office, do they know this, or do they think they've got an idea of the law?
I think, unfortunately, we've got so many laws that the way that things happen in this country is that we turn to lawyers to tell us what the law says.
Right.
And that is the biggest mistake, as I have discovered over the last 50 years. Lawyers in this country, particularly government lawyers, never tell the truth.
Yes.
It's not, they don't see it to be their job. Whereas we have an appointed Attorney General to keep us lawful as a nation. He doesn't do that at all, or she doesn't do that at all. She just follows orders from the Attorney General's Department or the Ministry of Justice to find a legal case to enable the government to say that its wars are lawful. So they come up with these totally irrelevant arguments. They've got nothing to do with the law, saying, for instance, for the Iraq War, the war has been authorized by the Security Council, operating under resolutions 687, 678, and 1441 of the United Nations Security Council, and therefore we're going to attack Iraq, or whatever it is. And when you look into it, Chapter 7 of the UN Charter, Article 41 is the crucial article in that, says quite clearly, the Security Council may decide what measures not involving the use of armed force are to be employed to give effect to its decisions. The British government leaves out the word not.
Not to use.
And tells us, our lawyers tell us, it's been authorised, it's fine. Now that has got absolutely nothing to do with the law. It is a typical process adopted particularly in this country and other common law countries, where the lawyers will just argue the case for the defence or the prosecution, never what the law actually says.
Now, let's look at those people who are saying that, these lawyers and what have you. Are they personally liable for these decisions? Because it seems that everything's hidden these days behind the big banner of corporations and businesses and limited liability. But are people, can you take them individually to task?
Absolutely, and we must. And it's written in. We signed in 1998 the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, and so after 60 years of work, the world finally had an international law enforcement authority, supposedly to uphold the laws we'd agreed in the UN Charter. And in that, we not only gave away jurisdiction to the International Criminal Court, and that was the first time in 1600 years the monarch had actually given away the jurisdiction to an outside entity over the people of this country.
Wow.
Including herself at the time when she did it in 2001.
Do you think she knew that she was doing that?
Well, I'm not sure, but
possibly from.
She has so many of these bloody laws to sign.
Yes.
She probably just signs it Just tell me that it's genuine and I'll sign it,
Yes.
type of thing. I don't know
Yes.
what happened, but it is utterly appalling that that law included 6 important crimes: war crimes, crimes against humanity, genocide, and conduct ancillary to war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. And those are universal crimes all over the world. And so ideally, every human being, whether they are the Attorney General, the monarch, or anybody else, is liable under those laws to be criminally liable, to be arrested, tried, convicted, and punished if they commit those offences.
Right.
So going back to the Attorney General, if he says this, that it's going to be lawful, when it isn't, he is committing one of the worst crimes, particularly if it leads to the death of 2 or more people in a war, or whatever it is. He could be convicted, thank you, of conduct ancillary to genocide. So it is very important to understand that. I mean, it's particularly under Article 27 of the Rome Statute is quite clear about this. It says these offences apply to the monarch, the head of state, the members of parliament, the civil service, the government, members of a government, or lawyers, everybody, basically. Right. It applies to everybody. And of course we ignore that completely, but it was also brought into English legislation. That's what people don't realise, is that in ratifying the Rome Statute, we introduced 2 new acts of parliament in this country: the International Criminal Court Act 2001 and the International Criminal Court Scotland Act 2001. And there are, in the International Criminal Court Act, Article 78 says this applies to the Crown and all members, property of the Crown, and all, basically all citizens, as it applies to everybody. So for the first time, the Queen, when she signed that law into law, she put herself under the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court.
Wow.
So that's the first time in 1600 years, since the time of the Romans. Apparently leaders in those days could be taken to Rome to...
Gosh, so that would include the king now then?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So the thing here is quite interesting, because people listening to you, and now I know my viewers, they're very good. They like to write to their MPs. They like to sort of, stir things up a bit in the right kind of way. I better put it like that. Is there advantage? I mean, I'm assuming there's going to be an advantage if people look at those laws that you've mentioned and remind the representatives, the MPs, of their duties and these laws that they ought to be upholding.
Absolutely. I think we have to do that as almost the first step. Is say, look, have any of you, I've asked MPs, for instance, back in 2004, 5, 6, that sort of period of time, did they know about what the UN Charter says, and more particularly what the UN Declaration on Principles of International Law actually says?
Right.
Now, they hadn't even heard of these documents. I mean, they heard about the UN Charter occasionally. Right. What they have heard about is the United Nations and the Security Council, and they think that anything the Security Council tells them to do, they must do. Completely wrong. The important thing is to understand the Charter, what the law actually says, and to implement that. So basically, yes.
Yes. Well, I mean, I'm absolutely certain that my viewers, some of them, are very keen, and as we're approaching an election, and people have told me that many of the MPs are going to be standing down because certain medical things that have been done, they don't want the backlash of that. And I think somebody said that the investigation, whatever you call it, I forget the actual term now, where the report into the mishaps with this is
the inquiry.
The inquiry is happening now after the election. That's when it's likely to happen. And it said, which will probably be after the summer. So that sort of seems to me that they'll have the election down in November perhaps, so that they don't start the inquiry till next year, just to, give them chance to flee the country and find homes in the middle of nowhere. So that
would be nice.
It would be a benefit if these people didn't keep popping up on the boards of places that they meet in Davos and things. But in the meantime, as you say, so they could be writing to their MPs as a first stance, just to remind them of the Charter, the UN Charter.
Absolutely, and the UN Declaration of Principles of International Law. That's the clearest definition of it.
And where can they find that?
On the UN website, it was UN General Assembly Resolution 2625.
Right.
So the General Assembly, if you put that UN GAR 2625, you will come up with the declaration, the UN Declaration on Principles of International Law. And if you the main one was the UN Charter, and you just put up the UN Charter and it will come up with all 111 sections.
Oh, right. So that, I mean, we're stirring up enthusiasm, because people are getting very desperate. The situation in this country alone, with all the penal stuff, the way the tax is being collected, I've had them banging on my door, posting letters, we're coming for you, Mr. Vobes, we're after you.
Yeah.
And people, as I said, you can't walk out your front door with a dog without being attacked by some upstart from the council. And then you've got the whole global picture and these think tanks who want to take away our sovereignty, and we've seen how that's been manipulated. So people are desperate to do something.
Absolutely.
And so the more that we can, with civil obedience, as you put it, which is just applying the laws that we, the country, have agreed to, and saying, actually, we're just going to hold you to the blooming fire. You've said that this is what we want. We agree with you. This is what we want. So let's have it. We're not funding wars.
Yep.
We're not being penalised by taxes which do fund wars and hurt people. We've got to do something.
Absolutely. That's what I decided back in 2003, and said, no, I just want you to uphold the law.
Yes.
And but unfortunately, for 14 years, 15 years, they paid no attention to it at all. Whatever I said, I said, look, here's the International Criminal Court Act. It makes it a criminal offence. So they took me to court, and the judge said, well, that doesn't apply in this court. And I thought, this is the most important law we've ever passed. Parliament brought it in 2001, and it makes a criminal offence of all these actions, and you say it doesn't apply in this court? Oh no, Mr. Coverdale, and you're going to go to prison. And sent me off to prison for 42 days. This sort of appalling way, this is why I have no... I have no confidence whatsoever in the legal profession in this country, right from the top, Supreme Court, down to ordinary magistrates' courts. Solicitors, barristers, none of them uphold the law.
I have a friend of mine who I can't say, but his mother was a magistrate, and she said to him, because he was trying to get her on the show to sort of reveal, she said, I can't because I had to sign the Official Secrets Act.
Oh, God.
And so she told him, so this is hearsay, I can't say this is true, but I believe it to be so. And so that's why I'm not identifying her, of course. She said that with the bulk hearings that they have in the council tax case, she was told, as a magistrate, having signed the Official Secrets Act, so she couldn't say anything, she is forced to sign the council's, i.e. the claimant's, fake liability orders.
Yeah.
And so it effectively making her personally liable because she's signed them out of her judiciary function, which is just outrageous. But she had to do it, and she can't tell anyone because she signed the official. And being the kind of lady, she's in her 80s now, so being somebody who was brought up believing in doing a right thing for the country, she says, I can't say this publicly, but she told him. And the worst part of it is these people. She is challenging her counsel, and they're taking her through the bulk hearing, and are taking her to court. She's an ex-magistrate who knows the bloody system, and so they're not even helping their own.
No.
You know, they're just so mean and nasty. It's like, well, that doesn't matter. You were a magistrate. We're not giving you anything. You pay up because it's this corporate Britain, and we've got our agenda, whatever it is.
Yeah, I mean, it's everywhere in every institution. I haven't found a single institution in this country that is really upright and honest all the time.
Yes,
no, they're just none of them.
It is so very sad. So numbers is what we want of sovereign people realizing that the tools that they've given us
can be used
against them. It's their own. I mean, that's that's the thing, isn't it?
Yes.
They've dropped their slings and arrows, or they've put them on the floor, and we've not noticed them because they're there. They're just on the floor. But actually, if we start to use the same tools that they use against us, all that legalese stuff, the legislation rather, we can actually say, actually, according to your legislation, you can't do all this.
And we have to do that in a very powerful way. And one of the things is to the numbers of people, as you say. The other is getting the institutions to understand their role to act on our behalf and not on behalf of the government.
Right.
So we can start to get councils, for instance. One of the stages we're going through now. Oh, before I go into that, the taxation trusts issue is very important. Again, using the system that they use against us or for them, against them. And we need to start using that. So it took me 14 years of challenging the system before I realized that there was another way of doing it. And that was useful. So a lot of people say, oh, well, you can't pay, you can't withhold tax because you'll get sent to prison. I used to think that, but now I know that's completely wrong. What you need to do is to put all your taxes in trust for the council or the government or the DVLA or whatever body it is that is asking for money, or all of them all together in one document, and say, I will happily pay this money to you, and I will put it in trust for you on four conditions. But those conditions are important. And you need to make sure that you use every penny of my money for lawful purposes and not one penny of it for criminal or illegal purposes. And if you can prove that, then you can have my money.
Yes.
But they can't.
And I have looked at your document, and we've gone through it before we went through. I mean, it would make a very fascinating video in and of itself if you've got the patience to go through each individual clause. But the amount of things that they would not be able to prove that they're not funding all sorts of different nefarious things is impossible. It's as close to a
watertight case.
Watertight case. That's what. Yeah, that was the word I was looking for.
Yeah.
You've done so brilliantly with it that they could not. How can they say they're not funding wars? The money's going to this Consolidated Fund. It doesn't go locally, and all of the clauses. So even though you put your money in your trustee box, let's say,
yep,
and your document to say here it is, and you send a copy of that to them.
Correct. Yeah.
And they've got to rebuke that.
Yeah, rebuttal. They have to, but they can't.
They can't. Yeah. Which is
so they find other ways, and they just ignore it. And with me, they just start the system again, sending me these letters that are just Romeo'd off, or whatever the word is nowadays.
Shake your eyes there with the old
afraid. I am. Well, I am getting on now. Yes.
But yes. So when you say they make it go away, so they're not actually making you pay. They're not the debt collectors.
I am not going to pay whatever until they lawfully,
Yes.
and they are not acting lawfully, and none of them seem to understand that.
Yes.
And in fact, they are committing the worst crimes known to mankind. And that's the next bit, is that if they don't do this, we need to start prosecuting some of the key people
Right.
for two crimes. One is conduct ancillary to genocide. So the point of being that if you start a war against, say, Iraq or the Yemen or wherever it is, you start attacking the Iraqi or Yemeni people, and with using weapons and so on, and you kill one or more of them, that is a criminal offence of genocide. And anyone who contributes money to that cause is committing conduct ancillary to genocide.
Which we would be doing with our taxes.
Exactly. And so I don't want to get sent to prison for 30 years, and it's the largest statutory punishment that there is in UK law. I think it's 30-year prison sentence if you break it.
Yes.
And the aiding and abetting is just as bad as the initiating the war. In law, you are a principal offender and considered a principal offender.
So I think you said to me that if I pay my taxes, I could be sitting next to somebody like Tony Blair, who may have instigated such thing on the same level.
Yes.
Which is,
And
not that I want to sit next to Tony Blair, thanks very much, but or share the same cell. Heaven forbid.
Yes.
But effectively, that's so the person who's instigated it through the machinations of government. But if you funded it, even through, and of course, ignorance of the law is
no excuse.
No excuse. We're all told we're supposed to pay these taxes, but actually we are contributing to the death of those men, women and children in far-off countries, even if they're just providing the weapons to do that, which is quite frightening. You said one of the things, so we can do that with the trust and thing. You said that the next phase is you're talking to the councils to try and make the individuals of the councils themselves understand the problem and know that they are personally liable.
Yes, with the purpose of the council setting up a trust on behalf of all the residents and businesses in the district or borough, because they should be acting on our behalf and not on behalf of war criminals in the government.
Yes.
And so every penny they send to the government is not only a criminal offence for them to send it, but it's causing the people of Worthing or wherever we are, Hastings and so on, to be involved in the worst crimes known to mankind. So we need to say, look, you've got to stop this. One simple way of stopping it is to set up a trust on behalf of all residents for all the money that comes into the council. So that's council tax, business rates, rents, fines, parking fees, whatever it is. It all goes into the council's pot, which, by the way, is part of the government's Consolidated Fund.
Yes.
And that money needs to be withheld from the Revenue and Customs. So instead of putting it into your standard account, which belongs there, you put it in a trust for the primary beneficiary, that's the government, but for a time-limited period. So until the end of the financial year, we'll put all that money in trust. So in Hastings, for instance, there's about £75 million of taxes and so on going into the council. They need to put all of that in trust for the residents as secondary beneficiaries. Primarily it's for the government, but it's on condition the government uses all the money solely for lawful purposes and never for criminal purposes. And if they can prove by the last day of the financial year that none of it will ever go for those purposes, then they can have the money.
Right.
But if not, on the 6th of April, the trustees of that trust need to repay the money to the residents and businesses in the borough or district. And so this is how to get the council operating on our behalf lawfully, entirely lawfully, obeying the law, civil obedience, and not handing the money over to the government and causing it to be used to murder men, women and children in Palestine or the Yemen or Iraq or wherever else.
And they must know, not all of the councillors obviously, but some of them, the higher up, must know how the system is worked, and they know that the money is not being kept locally, that it is being utilised by the government. They may not know the legal ramifications of how that's being used, but they must know that it isn't, that the money goes to this fund and then a budget comes back to them, which they have to abide by with all the additions of LTNs, 15-minute cities, but, all of that, the surveillance and crap that we've seen put on us.
I think, my assumption used to be that they must know this. But what I found is over the last 40 years, the propaganda from the government has said, if you look at every tax demand, it says we're going to spend this money on the police, the fire brigade, local, education and so on. And so everybody believes it, including the councillors and most of the staff.
Right.
And they say the money goes straight from the council account to these people. Cash-wise, it might, but that's not the effective way in which it happens, because it goes to that account is owned by the government. It goes into the government's Consolidated Fund, and in this financial year, for instance, we know, according to the Office of Budget Responsibility, £44.4 billion of the government's income is council tax. So that is the definition of the money going into the Consolidated Fund. So although this is how it happens, and it's out there in the open, most of the operatives and most residents and so on do not understand that this is what happens to the money. Therefore, they just go along with the system we've been propagandized into for the last 50 years.
Yes, gosh. And how difficult do you think it will be to get the council to sit round and have a meeting and face this information, that they are actually partaking in unlawful action with the collection of their taxes?
I think we have a real opportunity actually this year, particularly in relation to MPs, with an upcoming general election, when they go out on the what's it called, the stop anyway, when they go out trying to get your votes, we need to start talking to them about it and say, look, did you know this is a criminal offence? You have been committing a criminal offence. Yes. Now, if we've got 650 MPs responsible for a total income of £1.014 trillion in this year, we know that at least 10% of that will be used for warfare and military affairs. So we're looking at around about £100 billion going towards mass murder, genocide, crimes against humanity, either now or a long time in the future. We're building these submarines that could blow up the world.
Yes.
All of that is a criminal offence, a worst criminal offence that you can commit. So we need to start making the MPs understand how they are breaking the law when they vote in favour of money for the Israelis to murder Palestinians and things like this. So we've got to have the discussions and show them firsthand how they are committing the worst crimes known to mankind.
I guess in May we have council.
I don't know when the next.
The next one is.
It comes up quite soon.
Yes, but
either
again,
way,
you could. But that's another target, really, to be saying to them, look, do you realise that the council tax that you're doing does this? We know that you're personally liable. And you said to me also what was interesting about just things like enforcement officers. And all of us in one way or another, but those people who are collecting the debts and putting you under strain, if they're employed by a company, which they most likely are, they're paying PAYE, which is of course a income tax, and that is feeding the same monster.
Yes.
And they're just also liable, if they pay that PAYE, to be prosecuted.
Yes, and they have an extra prosecution potential because Section 15 of the Terrorism Act introduces 2000, by the way, Terrorism Act 2000 introduces 3 criminal offences. One for demanding the money, so when you get a demand letter, that is a criminal offence. The second one is for collecting the money. If they collect the money from you, that's a second criminal offence. And the third one is if they then hand that, or any of it, to somebody else, knowing it will be used or suspecting some of it will be used for the purposes of terrorism and warfare, basically.
Right.
So it's 3 criminal offences the bailiff is associated with, not just one.
Wow.
Each of which is punishable by 14 years in prison as a maximum. So if you have 3 offences, that's 42 years in prison, which is the answer to our life.
So I have a situation then, and many people will be in this, unfortunately, that I have bailiffs coming to my door. The last one was last night, in actual fact. I happened to be out, so I didn't have to confront them. And they've put a letter, which I haven't opened, but presumably it will be a demanding letter, because they're not saying, we'd like to give you some flowers and chocolates. You know, they never say that, the swines. Or we'd love to walk your dog or anything like that for you. Not that I've got a dog. And so that in of itself is a criminal offence.
Yes. Under Section 15(1) of the Terrorism Act, asking another person to provide money, some of which you know or suspect may be used for the purposes of terrorism,
right,
is a criminal offence under Section 15(1) of the Terrorism Act 2000.
And it's that word "suspect,"
and that's
you know, because you can imagine you're going to be paying your taxes with that money, or the company behind you, or you. So you have every reason to suspect that some of that money is going towards terrorism.
Yes, and there's an added bonus to all of this, which is Section 19 of the Terrorism Act, which for the first time, as far as I can find out, in this country, makes it a criminal offence. If you know of somebody else who is committing an offence under Sections 15 to 18 of the Terrorism Act, so 15(1), if a bailiff comes to the door and does this, and if you know that that is a criminal offence, you have a legal duty to report it to a constable, the police basically, and moreover, if you don't, you commit a criminal offence which is punishable by up to 5 years in prison.
Wow.
So all the law is there for us to use. We now need to start using it. And this is the thing. I mean, that's the first time I can find where it's a crime of omission for forgetting to report somebody for a criminal offence.
So that's really interesting. I mean, I wish I'd known that, because I had the police when in my situation, and many people do find this, that the bailiff calls the police to sort of legitimise what they're doing, but actually there you have a constable of the law that you can say, look, he is using menaces and threats to extract money from me, which is under the section that you said, which has now gone out of my memory.
Section 19 of the Terrorism Act 2000.
And I should be reporting it to that policeman.
And you must.
And
you have a legal duty to report it.
Yes. What was really bad is these policemen that I was talking to, and I know from my viewers' emails, it's the same thing. They're just ignoring the stuff I'm saying, believing that what is effectively a civil situation with what the courts are doing, and it's not a criminal situation, although it is a criminal situation because it's an act of terrorism. I mean, it's
funding terrorism.
Funding terrorism. This is. I mean, what we're doing is we are empowering people in that civil, obedient way to say the law is there. We just have been so ignorant of it, but we have a duty to, as you say, we have that duty. Otherwise, we'll end up 5 years in prison. This is amazing, Chris.
It is. I mean, but it's all there, and it's in black and white, and we have been misled for 75 years over these statements in the UN Charter. Never threaten or use force, and you get our Attorney General standing up and saying, it's going to be legal under Security Council resolutions or whatever it is.
Yes.
It is all false from top to bottom. And I have evidence, actually, of the Supreme Court misleading us in relation to the law. I don't know if we're going to go into that now, but I mean, it's all there. You never trust. For me, never again trust a lawyer or solicitor. Always just go back to the law.
Yes. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I think that we may well have opened your eyes on a number of things there, and you'll all hopefully be buzzing, as indeed I am, on so much, really. Chris, people will be itching to find out if you've got a website. They can find out more. They can somehow set up this trust you referred to lawfully not pay the bills because of all the things we've discussed. How do they do that?
Yes, we have the website. It is probityco.com. That's probityco.com. Based on the word probity, which we need more of in this country. We're setting up an organisation called Probity, which really means sort of integrity in public life. We haven't had integrity in public life for a couple of 100 years, and it's time we did. And so if people would like to support us, then there'll be an opportunity to do that. I don't know if it's up yet on the website. It's only been up 3 or 4 weeks. But you can download the paperwork, the taxation, the individual taxation trusts, and we've now got a corporate one there. It's important to understand that company directors and councillors are responsible for huge amounts of money, and so they need to stop paying that to the government.
Yes.
And do it straight away.
And they need to know that, don't they? Because if they know then they're actually liable.
Yeah.
As you say, they're probably in ignorance. If they actually know that they're liable for this, they might start thinking twice about trying to penalise other people and not think that they've got any liability when in fact they have.
I've got massive liability. It's criminal liability and not civil liability. Right. And so all this stuff about not being liable for the inoculations and so on, that is, you may not be liable under civil law because of certain acts of Parliament, but you are always liable under criminal law for genocide.
I'll leave the links in the description. I know that you're buzzing with that. That'll give you something over the weekend to do some investigation on. Chris, it's been so wonderful to have you here in the studio and to go through all this and to remind people of the ammo that's there for us and was put in place for us.
Yes.
And it's just been misused by all these swines who seem to think that they can get away with murder.
Yes. All we need is for our leaders and taxpayers to obey, uphold and enforce the law. And
let's hope they do in the future as we start challenging them at every stage.
Yes.
And
exactly.
Quite right too. Well, there we are, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you have a fantastic weekend. I hope all of this has been an eye-opener, as it has to me. Thank you so much, Chris. Really appreciate it. Delighted. I will be back, of course, with more monologues and wonderful interviews. But until the next time, from Chris Coverdale and myself here in the studio, have a good weekend. Bye for now.
Thank you. Bye.